Welcome, everyone. We are online now, and I would like to welcome you to this, from my perspective, very important discussion, a discussion that will deal with issues that have shaken a lot of us during the past weeks, and I don't mean by them only the war, the unprecedented aggression that the Russian government has started against Ukraine. I also mean the evidence and the pictures and the reports that are coming again and again and more, and I'm sure there will be more of that, evidence of violence against civilians, against infrastructure, something that most experts probably would agree we can already start calling, at least suspect them being war crimes by the Russian army and the Russian other Russian actors participating in those war actions and war conduct. We decided on a very short notice to devote to this 1 hour, because we need to understand and to agree among ourselves, not only what we can do now to stop this aggression, but also what we, as Europeans and non-EU actors, what we can do now already to start talking about accountability and responsibility of those who are responsible for what is happening. And that's why I am very grateful, especially because this was such a short notice, to our three guests, three experts of a very high level to join us. First of all, I would like to thank and to welcome Ladislav Hamran, the chief, the president of Eurojust, of our justice institution of the European Union. Ladislav has been, was a general prosecutor and worked in the general prosecutor office in Bratislava. He used to deal with economic crime cases and asset recovery. So he has a lot of long year experience on many of those issues. And since 2017, he has become president of Eurojust. Ladislav Hamran, welcome to this round. Let me introduce the other two guests as well, so that we already know who is upcoming as our speakers. Belinda Cooper, a professor on numerous renowned institutions with a lot of expertise on war crimes and also the historical legacy of Nuremberg and other war crimes processes. She explores interconnections between Nuremberg tribunals and today's international criminal tribunals, and she was educated at the Yale Law School and now teaches at Columbia and New York University. Welcome, Belinda, to New York. And last but not least, Pavel Kuftyryev, who is an attorney himself, who graduated from the National University of Kyiv in law, and as a president of Ukrainian public organization League of the Lawyers of Ukraine, a very active and a very successful professional from Ukraine, currently observing the situation from the close. Let's start right away with a round of inputs, and I would like, of course, as first to address the president. President Hamran, you and we read a lot about the task force where Eurojust will be participating. As far as I understand, this is a task force which was initiated by some member states, but where European institutions are also engaged. And the goal of this task force, this is my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, is to secure evidence of what is going on now. How does this happen? What are the mechanisms that you're having, and what are the actions that you're conducting that you can talk about? Thank you for joining us. You have the floor, President.
Thank you so much, Sergey, and good evening to you all. Actually, I would like to slightly correct you in one aspect. The task force was established indeed, but the task force is there to actually coordinate investigations and prosecutions which were launched in member states against Russian oligarchs and Belarusian oligarchs and companies. So this is one aspect, but we were also mandated and tasked to coordinate investigations and prosecutions in war crimes and crimes against humanity. If you allow me, I will first start with war crimes and crimes against humanity. Actually, perhaps as a scene setter, I have to say that we have been witnessing a very robust international response to the armed conflict in Ukraine. Actually, already on 2nd March 2022, so only 6 days after the start of the armed conflict in Ukraine, Eurojust organized a first meeting between EU member states and 10 third countries represented at Eurojust to discuss the possibilities to investigate war crimes allegedly committed by Russian armed forces on the territory of Ukraine. This was the first meeting in which actually 3 countries, already 6 days after the start of the conflict, actually indicated that they would like to establish a joint investigation team and jointly investigate crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Actually, these countries were Ukraine, of course, Poland and Lithuania. Actually, they started immediately after this meeting the negotiations on the joint agreement to set up a joint investigation team. Actually, on 25th of March, this agreement was signed officially with the involvement of Eurojust. So Eurojust will support legally, analytically, financially, logistically, the operation of this joint investigation team. However, what has happened meanwhile, and that actually many EU countries started their own investigations in war crimes and crimes against humanity, and these were actually countries which used the so-called principle of universal jurisdiction. And today we have 10 EU member states who have opened their own national investigation. We have also Norway and of course Ukraine having their own investigation. So already I would say in 1 month and more, we have an impressive number of investigations. Plus, you also may remember that the prosecutor Karin Khan also on 2nd of March announced that ICC will also start their own investigation. Actually, we met with the chief prosecutor ICC already declared their interest to join this joint investigation team, and currently talks are ongoing between ICC and those 3 countries how to join this joint investigation team. I know that there are other talks with other countries, so this is something what is very different from previous armed conflicts that we have actually so many investigations, and more or less we during the conflict we collect evidence and we from the I would say very first day started collecting very valuable piece of evidence which will be then used for criminal prosecutions in the member states or in the ICC or in Ukraine. Perhaps as a first input, this should be enough, and later on I will also speak about the task force related to financial crimes and economic crimes committed by Russian oligarchs.
Thank you so much for this very brief but very concise understanding, and thanks for explaining, because as you have seen, even me myself, it's so complex that it's very difficult to actually understand how many different investigations are taking place in which framework. Belinda Cooper from New York. Belinda, good morning to you in New York. Well, you deal with this from a little bit of an analytical perspective. What do you think? I mean, you hear the news, you understand what is going on. What are the prospects for us, and what avenues can we take in order to address those issues, also against the background of historical experiences that we have? Belinda, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I really appreciate that you're talking about this issue. Yeah, I think as Mr. Hamran pointed out, there's already, we have a history already of doing these kinds of prosecutions. So it's not new anymore. And there's actually some mechanisms in place, or that can quickly be put in place. As you may know, prosecution of international crimes has been possible since Nuremberg, but only really got started after the end of the Cold War. And we've had tribunals, and now we have the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court, as was already mentioned, has already begun to investigate. Some of the issues around that are, as you know, the ICC is a treaty court. It has 123 members. Russia is not a member, and Ukraine is also not officially a member. But Ukraine accepted the jurisdiction of the court in 2013 already, expanded it in 2014. And because they've accepted the court's jurisdiction, they are essentially have the same, the situation is the same as if they were a member. So Russia could not technically, the jurisdictional requirements are that crimes can only be prosecuted by the ICC if they're committed by a national of a state party or on the territory of a state party. Russia is not a state party, but Ukraine is. And these crimes are all committed on the territory of Ukraine. So that's pretty clear. The court has taken on the case. There was some issues about how they got it, the way that there are a number of ways the court can get a case. Obviously, Security Council referral isn't an option here because Russia would veto that. The prosecutor could take up the case on his own. That would require that he goes in front of a panel that would allow that. So he essentially asked states, another way that the court can get cases is through state party referral. And he essentially asked for states to refer the case. And 41 states asked the ICC to take this case. Because it was done that way, he doesn't have to take the case in front of a panel of judges to be certified. And that means he can start right away. So the investigation has already started. So the ICC is taking the case or is investigating the case. The crimes that the ICC can deal with are war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. I think that right now the charges they're investigating are just war crimes and crimes against humanity. Genocide is a little more complicated. We can talk about that later if you want. But in any case, that's actually underway now. The investigation is underway. And I know the ICC is on the ground, doing investigations, probably working with all these other, with the EU and other mechanisms. Some of the issues, of course, I mean, the issues that come up are the main issue is getting a hold of the perpetrators. I mean, they can investigate these crimes, but since Russia is not a member, since Russia is not going to cooperate in these investigations, one of the problems is going to be, how do you actually get the perpetrators? We saw in former Yugoslavia with the ad hoc court for Yugoslavia that it took 20 years for some of the indictees, or almost 20 years for some of the indictees to actually be prosecuted. But I think the idea for international justice is that sooner or later we get you. Sooner or later we will get some of the people responsible. If not Putin, then perhaps the people who made possible what he's doing now. The ICC is not really for low-level soldiers committing low-level war crimes. The idea behind the ICC is really to try and get the people most responsible. And while that's obviously what we want, again, getting hold of those people is not always easy. As was already mentioned, other ways to do this is through universal jurisdiction, which is the idea that these crimes are so serious that any country can prosecute them, regardless of whether the crime happened on their territory, had anything to do with their nationals. And that's something, as was already mentioned, that's already been begun in some countries. A bigger issue, and I'm just going to mention this because it's something that's being discussed a lot in international legal circles, is the so-called crime of aggression. That's something that's come up here. The crime of aggression is included in the ICC statute, but it's a very limited, the jurisdiction is very limited. And Russia is not a member of the court, and you don't have the same jurisdictional arrangement as you have with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. So there's been a lot of discussion about the possibility of perhaps creating a special tribunal of some sort to prosecute aggression. This is very obvious aggression. It's a very obvious violation of the UN Charter. There's no real sort of question about that. This is exactly the kind of aggression that the UN Charter prohibits. And this is exactly the kind of aggression that the definition that's been worked out under the ICC is created to prevent or to punish. So this is really the kind of the big international legal question. And again, there's been discussions of what kind of court, whether there's some kind of ad hoc new hybrid court could be created through the General Assembly and Ukraine working together. Or somebody suggested recently an EU court of some sort. So there's also been some attempts to start universal jurisdiction prosecutions for aggression. I think Poland and Lithuania, I think, both have the ability in their domestic law to prosecute aggression, but there's a question about whether that actually would work legally. And also there's questions about sovereign immunity, because in international courts, it doesn't matter if you're a head of state, you can still be prosecuted for all of these international crimes. In domestic courts, there are issues about one state prosecuting the sovereign, the leaders of another state. So those are just some of the very basic legal issues. And we can talk about it further if you have questions.
Thank you. That eliminates already kind of the landscape, what we're talking about here. And actually, maybe later we could discuss whether this plurality of options that we're talking about is a strength or a weakness of what we're experiencing now, because this is a question that is still open to me, and I would be happy to hear your reaction to that. But first, let's go to Ukraine, to our Ukrainian friends. And Pavel, first of all, our deep solidarity with you and your country. I think this is always important to start any conversation with that, because I know how much you go through and your compatriots go through now, and believe us, we are firmly on your side. Thank you for joining us despite all of this, and thanks for continuing to work, because I know you are trying to somehow find a way of addressing certain issues, especially in the area of environmental law and environmental crimes. Pavel, could you explain to us, how do you see the situation now on the ground? I mean, the obvious news reports we know, but from the perspective maybe of the environmental damages that are happening, and what do you think and could be done about that? Pavel, welcome here. You have the floor, please. You have to maybe our team has to unmute yourself. You're still muted. We tried it before, it worked. Maybe Tom from our now we can hear you. No, we could. Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
Welcome.
First of all, thank you so much for your for your protection of our country, Mr. Lagodinsky and European Green, all with Ukraine. Thank you so much. And yesterday I have called with many people from Ukraine. Thank you. For many people for Ukrainians, the Minister of Environmental, of General Prosecutor about environmental crime, and so many people. And today I want to speak maybe 7, maybe 8 minutes about what this guy from Ukraine said about a situation in environmental damage and environmental compensation and environmental problem in Ukraine. It seems to me it's important to our discussion. And then I have representation 6 bullet points what I think, because we discussed today, need to do with Ukraine in together go to discuss this question. The war of aggression included by Russia against Ukraine has been complemented by terrible war crimes and many violations of international humanitarian law. The armed force of the Russian Federation has deliberately and directly violated Geneva's conventions. Violence and murder are civilization, incriminate attack on civilian infrastructure, forced remove of property, and they also target environmental damage and deliberate destruction of ecological system. First of all, the World War I occupation of the Chernobyl nuclear point. And I speak about this point yesterday with our Mr. Streletsky, who is head of Ukrainian Environmental Agency. The moment of Russian troops equipped in the Chernobyl zone used their disturbance and radiation elements previously left as the soil. Such actions used substantial radiation leakage. The occupation of the biggest nuclear power plant in Europe, Zaporozhye, took place with weapons being used in excommunication reactors. Russian forces raid the plant and have stored weapons which, if detonate, could lead to catastrophe, one of the biggest in the world. Rosatom personnel were moved from Russia to Zaporozhye to control the takeover of the Zaporozhye plant station. Russian missile attacks have destroyed full depots and sites. You all see them. There have been dozens of such incidents, and every use of weapons has been accompanied by a massive amount of large scale, harmful emission into the atmosphere. Russia has provided phosphor bombs widely, and there is a real threat of the use of chemical weapons. For each of these facts, the law environmental agency in Ukraine have already making criminal investigation. This fact should be Russian Federation should be recognized as a nuclear terrorist. Russian Federation membership of all environmental convention must be terminated. It's our opinion. It's the opinion of our Ukrainian people. Russian representative must be excluded from any environmental bodies. In order, in documents and records and the facts, Russian Federation war crimes against the environmental, a number of state commissions have been established of Ukraine and the NGOs. Introduced is the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, the DIA, the name of this project, single portal for the citizens of Ukraine, made it possible to receive more than 53,000 people from citizens of Ukraine about damage of this property and environmental damage too. On March 1, 2022, the operation Hardly-Greatest was created under the State Environmental Inspectors of Ukraine. It brings together representatives of the community of environmental policy and natural management of Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources of Ukraine, the State Ecology Inspector and Security Service in Ukraine and other Ukrainian governments. There is also a group under the Office of Attorney General that document war crimes and crimes against humanity. At this moment, the access of specialists and experts to the place of committing environmental crimes is limited as due to the occupation of these territories and due to the danger of stating of these territories. The Office of the Prosecutor has created a special web portal. I take this portal, using which any person can send factual Christmas photos, video, others evidence about war crimes in the Russian army and the territory of Ukraine, and of course environmental crimes too. And many big people say it about this. Very famous NGO, Ecology, Law and Human, create a Google form that can also be used to report about crimes against environmental, and where users can create their own database with the following parameters: the impact of emergency event, a date, coordinates, inventory, contribution, source, photo and video, and so on. Unfortunately, nowadays in Ukraine, the legislative level has not been developed an active mechanism for assessing environmental damage used by military operation. However, at the state level, a single commission was not created to establish and investigate the crimes of the Russian army, and to create how in USSR during the Second World War, the result of which was the base of prosecution in the Nuremberg trials in Germany. These facts is crimes cannot be punished. The damage was used not only the state of Ukrainian, but not citizen of Ukrainian. Damage is loss of property, harm to health, the right, a safe environmental for life, moral damage, use as war, and other included environmental damage. That is why the compensation for harm will be the only effective and real way to project the right to victims. For this reason, we need, for my mind, a clear and specific mechanism for protection and rights of victims by contacting a specific law environmental agency. The mechanism of judicial protection at the national level in Ukraine is not effective today because of Russian aggression. In addition, at the moment, the decision of the National Court of Ukraine for execution outside Ukraine will require a red paper procedure. In fact, at this moment, there is not international court that can the change from individual or collective crimes for compensation for harm used for Russian Federation. This clear formally regulated legal mechanism is needed to restore the rights of people who are affected by the military aggression of Russia. This will effectively protect the rights of Ukrainian individuals and legal eternity in courts. Such a mechanism should provide the possibility of individual protection of rights and the possibility of class action, to my mind. Such mechanisms can be most effective and give quickly, effectively, war consideration of such crimes. The possibility of legislative regulation at the level of the European Union. Regulation would make it possible to determine one or more competent UN member courts that would be the jurisdiction on such case. Case of Ukrainian residents and compensation of damage used by Russian military aggression. To ensure the confiscation of assets of Russian businessmen or oligarchs and Kremlin affiliate need for legislation on subsidiary liability of such person who harm used by the military aggression for Russian Federation. And I have 6 bullet points. Of course, it's discussed question, but first, we need a clear and consistent mechanism on compensation for damage used by aggression of Russia invalid for each jurisdiction. Second, we need to introduce a legislative mechanism of subsidiary liability of Russian businessmen or oligarchs, Kremlin oligarchs and Kremlin affiliates, which have assets located outside Russia. Third, Russian membership should be terminate its old international organization or state-owned companies, including whose contribution from nuclear terrorism or Rosatom, must be added to sanction list. Fourth, a new Nuremberg trial for Russia and the leaders is needed because they are war criminals that have committed war crimes in Ukraine. Fifth, class action by different groups on individuals should be spent by refugee, by business, by NGOs, with claim compensation for damage used by military aggression. And last but not least, campaigns that have not left the Russian market and continue the replenishing the budget of Russia should be also be subject in subsidiary liability for cooperation. Thank you so much, and very want to discuss with you some questions.
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you so much, especially the 6 very clear points at the end were very illuminated. With that, maybe back to President Hamran. You also mentioned that you deal with environmental crimes. How does that look from your side? Maybe we'll start with that, because this is kind of the starting point of an important conversation.
No, actually, to my knowledge, no country so far, EU country, started the investigation in relation to ecocide or any serious form of environmental crime. As I was mentioning, all the investigations which have started are focusing on war crimes and crimes against humanity. As Belinda mentioned, I know that 3 countries started the investigation also into crime of aggression. These are Poland, Lithuania, and Ukraine. Now, I think what I mentioned, that I see some possibilities for prosecution of ecocide. There are several options here. Actually, I learned recently that Ukraine is one of a small number of states that have criminalized ecocide through domestic legislation. So Ukraine defines ecocide as mass destruction of flora and fauna, poisoning of air or water resources, and also any other actions that may cause an environmental disaster. This is clearly mentioned in Article 4.1 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. But there are also other possibilities than to start an investigation in Ukraine about ecocide. Also in Rome Statute, there are certain possibilities. Actually, directly under Article 8, paragraph B.4 of the ICC Rome Statute, the court has jurisdiction over crime, and now I quote, intentionally launching an attack in the knowledge that such attack will cause widespread, long-term, and severe damage to the natural environment. However, to prove this crime in any subsequent trial, the ICC would need to demonstrate that the damage to the natural environment was clearly excessive in relation to the concrete and direct overall military advantage anticipated. So the reference to the advantage anticipated is very important. Actually, it would need to be demonstrated by the prosecution, as it's mentioned by Article A, paragraph B.4. And to my knowledge, this concept has never been tried before the court. So this is also something new. Additional possibility might be that actually this joint investigation team between three countries will include this element of environmental crime also to their scope of investigation. Another possibility is that EU member states will start their own investigations in this particular aspect as well. However, at this stage, I personally think that the best way how to document this crime is the hands of the Ukrainian authorities, as they have direct access to those territories and areas, and actually they can collect evidence which would document that there were attempts to cause massive destruction of flora and fauna in Ukraine.
Thank you. And I would like to maybe pose this question back to Pavel. So do I understand correctly that the Ukrainian authorities are already collecting and trying to secure evidence of environmental damage? This is what Ladislav mentioned. So it is already happening now under the auspices of the ministries or agencies?
Thank you for the question. Yes, now General Prosecutor of Department of Environmental and Department of War, it's work for evidence from environmental crime. In Ukrainian, it's correct for Mr. President. We have ecocide in our criminal code, and we have maybe 500 criminal case for ecocide, and now this General Prosecute and Ukrainian service, you know how it's service, security service, yeah. And today I spoke with one of the head of Ukrainian General Prosecute, and she said me about he need help because and assist of European Union and maybe Eurojust or something, another great organization with methodology, and I said about in my bullet point, methodology of environmental damage, because facts, we have facts, 500 and more, every day it's more, criminal case. But she says that Ukrainian security and the Ukrainian general prosecutor have a methodology problem for this kind of criminal case. But we have it now 500 criminal case by ecocide and the same articles of Ukrainian criminal code.
Well, that's an interesting aspect and a very specific one. Thank you for pointing this out, because it is very often not a matter of just the larger picture. It's a matter of very clear, specific things that we need maybe assistance or cooperation with. Before we go to Belinda, and I have another question to her, but before we go back to her, Ladislav, first of all, there is I would like to ask those viewers who are logged in now, you can pose your questions under Q&A section of the chat. You're welcome to pose your questions. I will then read them to our audience. But before we go to the audience and before that to Belinda, President Hamran, what about this other thing that you mentioned, the issue of assets and sanctions against oligarchs? Because if we are at some point in a situation where we have crimes against the environment or any other crimes that involve compensations, then I see the two avenues that we can go through. Because usually if we have like an interstate argument, like we had, for example, between, I think, Italy and Germany, I think also Greece and Germany, it was also always a problem of how to compensate, even if the compensation has been awarded. Then there were questions, you know, should the Goethe Institutes be arrested? You know, what kind of property do you get to actually compensate and for? Here we have, on the one hand, the Russian assets and reserves that have been frozen now. And on the other hand, you have the oligarchs and their assets that hopefully are frozen now. The question is there a legal way of getting there to them? Because we are, of course, a rule of law union, right? And I'm sure they will go to court, etc. What do you have an idea? Do you have a plan on how to go about that?
Actually, let me start by saying that European Commission indeed has set up this task force. The full name is Seize and Freeze Task Force. As you rightly pointed out, now EU approved a sanctioned list with more than 800 entities. These are either physical persons or legal persons which are subject of those sanctions. We have to underline that those sanctions do not have a punitive effect. So it means that the assets are frozen. However, still the ownership belongs to Russian citizens or Belarusian citizens or companies. So freezing of those assets doesn't, of course, mean that that we can use those assets for compensation. And actually, even a big question is that how to find a kind of a link between administrative freezing and criminal confiscation, because confiscation in a criminal proceeding, actually, it's a punishment, and only a court can impose such a punishment. You know, there is a big gap between enforcement of administrative sanctions and convictions as the end result of criminal proceedings. So it might be a big challenge, of course, as you rightly mentioned, because we have certain values and rule of law values, and regardless of the nationality, we have to respect this. It will be a big, in my opinion, political debate, and it's up to other political leaders to find a solution to that.
Well, thanks for passing the responsibility back to us. And this will be a complex question to decide, but maybe we could learn from history. Belinda, you explored the situation during the Nuremberg tribunals. You look at many other ways and tribunals. Was there? I mean, this is a situation of a kind of a post-conflict and post-war, or even during the war. It's an extraordinary situation. How? And we know that some of the issues that were dealt with and some of the laws that were applied were actually something that many even afterwards said, you know, they say in German, Siegerjustiz, the victory is justice, which was not very, you know, the conventional, let's put it this way, path. Is there a kind of a customary international law or some convention in international relations that in a situation of war, certain steps can be taken, for example, regarding assets that would, you know, be an exception following an aggression and following war crimes, because otherwise the victims would not be able to come to arrive to justice, and the perpetrators will not be punished. Belinda, you have to unlock yourself, even in times of war.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know of any international law that allows confiscation of assets for compensation. I'm just not an expert on that area. What I would say is that reparations, compensation has become much more of a discussion point in international law over the past years, the recent years, when with the International Tribunal. There's a trust fund for victims at the International Court, although hasn't quite, I think its actual functioning is still a little bit uncertain. So there is much more discussion of the connection between justice and reparations. That would be sort of my general comment on that. Reparations is absolutely now an issue. There's been discussion of including reparations, I think, in a peace treaty, or compensation in a peace treaty. So I think that's certainly part of the discussion. I think something like, you know, Versailles, where you had the Treaty of Versailles, where you had, you know, at the end of a war, one side required to pay all sorts of reparations. I think nobody would you know, support that now, but legal mechanisms for reparations or compensation is certainly part of the discussion, especially for individual victims.
What about the general issue of kind of extraordinary judicial state of I don't know, of rules that we experienced historically? I mean, is there a path to say that in a wartime or following the wartime, also in international law, we have different ways of dealing with perpetrators, for example?
The laws of war are different from I mean, the requirements of war crimes law are different from peacetime law, but war crimes law and war crimes law is what you'd apply in situations like this conflict. I mean, situations of conflict, but war crimes law is very clear on treatment of civilians. I mean, there's no question that you can't, you know, randomly, indiscriminately kill civilians, that you can't target civilians. The only difference between war crimes law, the laws of war, and well, the major difference between laws of war and peacetime law is that war crimes law assumes conflict. It doesn't criminalize the conflict, it criminalizes the behavior in the conflict. This is where the crime of aggression now, you know, sort of gets us toward criminalizing the actual aggression. But the laws of war are very clear on humane treatment of civilians, on not, you know, you're not allowed to target civilians. You can't, you know, bomb civilian targets indiscriminately. You certainly can't, you know, shoot civilians with their hands tied behind their backs. I mean, this is all clearly not permitted when you occupy territory in a war. So I think in that sense, even though we have a special set of laws for wartime, they certainly don't permit, like as Ladislav mentioned, they do for example, there's this balance of, a disproportionality. So you are allowed to do certain things as a military force that may harm civilians, but there has to be proportionality. There has to be a balance. There has to be a military reason for it. You can't simply indiscriminately kill civilians. So in that sense, there's no difference in the sense that you can't treat civilians inhumanely in war or in peace.
Okay. One question that I have, and I don't know what, but I think we lost for a while. We lost our Pavel friend from Ukraine. We have two questions by our viewers. One is a question from Berlin, from Kinga. She says, I appreciate the difference between prosecution of the main responsible persons and prosecution for single war crimes on the ground. This is something that you, I think, Belinda, mentioned. The first certainly is uttermore important, but nevertheless, says Kinga, is there a place for the latter? Do you think it's also important? So prosecuting the small, let's say the small soldiers, like we had, in our Berlin Wall prosecution, it was actually about the individuals who actually shot at people. What is the room and what is the venue towards that?
Yes, of course, I absolutely agree. Of course, there's room for both. I think normally, just very briefly with war crimes, normal war crimes are committed not as part of a policy. Normally, war crimes, are violating the Geneva Conventions. The state for whom the soldier is acting would punish that. That's not going to happen here, clearly, most likely. So yes, and the difficulty, the greatest difficulty is always getting the leaders. So that's why the idea of an international criminal tribunal is to get the people most responsible, not to get the lower levels, and to get the leaders in situations where it's not just an individual violation of the laws of war, but where it's a widespread, a more systematic violation. For that, the ICC is not the best forum, but certainly. Under universal jurisdiction, countries other than, again, Russia should be the country that's punishing this. Since it's not going to, certainly under universal jurisdiction, any country could make an argument, I think, to prosecute lower level soldiers who are guilty of atrocities. The question again would be, how do you get a hold of them? How do you actually, what's happened in the past has been, in cases of refugees, where refugees turn up, that Germany just had this situation of a Syrian refugee that they tried under Germany tried under universal jurisdiction laws, where you end up, refugees end up in the country, and among those refugees are perpetrators, and they can be held accountable under universal jurisdiction laws. It's hard, again, because getting your hands on people is harder when you're doing it through a universal jurisdiction kind of trial.
President Hamran, and please be free to comment on what Belinda said, but also there is a question specifically to you. Is the task force also mandated with coordinating investigations and prosecutions regarding the crime of aggression? If not, why was it not included in the mandate? Is a question by Ms. Hartig.
Thank you so much. Perhaps just to add what Belinda said, I fully agree. Actually, perhaps a side comment from my side is that the international community puts big expectations and emphasis on the role of the ICC. Here, I would like to add and emphasize that according to Rome statutes, it's already in the preamble, it's mentioned that ICC shall be only complementary to national jurisdictions. So actually, it's primarily the duty of every state to exercise jurisdiction over core international crimes. And this is a very clear message. This is also the reason why today 10 EU countries already started their own investigations. What I would like to mention as well, that core international crimes are not statute barred. So actually, even after 30, 40, 50 years, we can prosecute them. You know, now we are focusing on a quick justice, but I'm afraid it's not going to happen so quickly. First of all, what is now a big challenge to actually document what is happening or what has happened in different regions. Then if we document, we have to actually have to prove that core international crimes were committed. And then we have to link those core international crimes to specific perpetrators. And another challenge will be, of course, to get those individuals to a court of law. Now, it might be a national court, it might be a court in Ukraine, it might be the ICC. So there are different avenues for different perpetrators. But I would like to mention that the primary focus is on member states, and ICC acts only as complementary to national courts. Now you may ask why ICC started, why countries have started, whether there is no competition. I think this is a very relevant question. I would say it's not a competition at all. I would say having a national prosecutions or investigations plus ICC, it gives you additional guarantees that these crimes will be or will not go unpunished.
Okay, so it's kind of a reserve, kind of a secondary lacune of jurisdiction.
Exactly. In relation to the second question, if I may, indeed, the task force, as I mentioned, is called Seize and Freeze Task Force, and it's only focused on assets of Russian oligarchs and Belarusian oligarchs, those who are on the sanction list of the EU. Aggression is not part of this mandate.
Well, thank you, Pavel. Maybe a question to you. What is your, from the perspective of, the country who is under assault? What is your wish for the European Union? What should we do apart from sharing methodology, as you said, on environmental crimes, but generally on war crimes? What is lacking? Because it's very difficult for us, for me, as a Western, a European EU attorney, to understand the deficits that are still there, the gaps in Ukraine where we can actually help. Please unmute yourself. Pavel, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I don't take microphone. I'm sorry. First of all, what I want to speak with you. For my opinion, the most important problem, if we say it about environmental law in Ukraine, it's methodology. We know I have a meeting with Kyiv. It take me some guys from Hugo this, but it's methodology. We say it's first question. Second question, we need to help. We need to think about, because it's war is not stopped. We understood this. But we understood this war, sometimes it's stopped. It is not nuclear bomb. It doesn't matter. It's made people from Russia, but it doesn't. Yeah, it's sorry. But if it's stopped, we have environmental crisis in Ukraine, but it's global crisis. It's not crisis from Ukrainian. It's global European and world crisis, but environmental in Ukraine. It's not about only people. It's about many other things. It's about air pollution. It's about, you know what I say. It's second question, because I know for our minister have some negotiation with Kyiv, and he told him in an interview, our minister said, because we have some program in European Union, for example, LIFE program, very famous, yeah. Ukrainian take it some money maybe for life to some environmental problem. It's second bullet point. And third, it's very important for me. It's about refugee in European Union. It's not about environmental, but it's environmental too, because this refugees, it's a very big problem for European Union, for Ukrainian, because these people have not money, and then in general, this big problem. And for my opinion, my idea about class action for these people, it's big problem. I understood what said all our colleagues, but it's big problem for European Union too, because if people don't go for home, I don't know, it's very big money, because it's 4 or 5 million people. It's not cynic, but it's very, very big problem for cooperation with these people, because not all these people have education and speak English, speak another language. It's a problem to cooperation with people, but in my opinion, we can do something to, for not money Ukrainian and not for money European Union. Maybe I say it, yes, it's very hard, rule of law, I understood all, I study very well in judicial faculty, but it's great problem. And last, it's, about some organization with Russia have some point of them for Rosatom, in MAGATE, and another organization. And last, for my opinion, what we need to do together, it's cooperation for rebuild Ukrainian environment, for rebuild, because because many plants that now we have not this plant, for example, Kremenchuk plant and so on. If we go and we win, for example, I suppose that Ukrainian, of course, win because it's European character of our nation. If we win this war, we need to rebuild our country, but you need to rebuild with sustainable development, устойчивое развитие, because it's very, very important for our country. And if this understood, we need to go, how it's next level, next two level, if we do this, because it's European character of our country, and we need to do this. And the green and European Union can do at this too. Because if we build new faculty, I don't know, plant in 20th century, we in 21st century. We need to sustain development for Ukrainian when the war is stopped, in my opinion. Thank you for your question.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks for also this outlook and this optimism, because you're not just talking about the crimes, you're talking about something that we will rebuild after this war, following this war. We promised to our viewers to finish within 1 hour. So if I just ask maybe Belinda and Ladislav, since Pavel has already spoken, to say, just in one sentence, what do you think that we in the European Parliament should take with us, and what homework we should aim at now? Because we talked about President Hamran's homework or Pavel's deeds. What should we do from your perspective? Where do you see the necessity? Belinda, you want to start with one sentence?
I think what's being done in terms of collecting evidence and what can be done in terms of figuring out alternative mechanisms for example, the crime of aggression and other crimes, those kinds of working on an alternative a forum for prosecuting that.
Thank you. And President Hamran, you have the final word.
Thank you so much, Sergey. My final word will be that you should rely and support existing mechanisms for investigation and prosecution of war crimes and crimes against impunity. Please do not invent any new mechanisms, tribunals or whatever. I think that we should be really proud of what we managed to create. Now we have to make sure that existing mechanisms are enough resources to support this important task.
Thank you. And the last sentence, I would like to read some of our Ukrainian friends who wrote to us. Thank you for supporting our country. Ecological terror is a global danger. This was someone from the Greens, Party of Greens of Ukraine, called the world to pay attention to ecological problems that were caused by Russian aggression. I think we all agree here that this is an important point, just as the point of humanitarian victims. But we are watching this very closely. Also, as vice chair of the jury committee, I must say, I'm in close touch with the chair. We are looking for ways of supporting the work of Eurojust and of dealing with those issues. We will continue this conversation and this work. And from that perspective, thank you very much to everyone who watched this. Our solidarity and our support to everyone in Ukraine and from Ukraine in this very difficult times. We are on your side, and we will remain on your side, even if it would be about after the war and about the prosecution of those who perpetrated those terrible deeds. Thank you very much to everyone, and see you soon.
Thank you so much.